Well, I think we're ready to get started for the deep dive this morning. I want to say welcome to everybody joining us here on May 1st. It's the first deep dive of the month of May and ready to get started. We're going to be talking this morning just about everything going on in the economy, about recession. That talk's going to pick up, of course, as we go throughout the summer. But with the Fed meeting this week, we want to be well prepared as those conversations come up. So grateful as always to everybody that joins the deep dive as we get started on Monday morning. I'll follow along here. Let us know where you're watching from. Always in the chat there. Let us know where you're at. We see people from all over the country that join the deep dive every Monday morning. It's the best way to start the week, where we're talking about the biggest topics in the business of real estate. And do it every Monday morning. So grateful for everybody that joins. Let's see if we've got folks on here yet. I'll try to follow along where you're at, but let us know where you're watching from. This morning, we're going to talk about a couple of things. First, I mentioned with the Fed meeting this week, we'll get a look at inflation after that next week. And, these talks of the economy slowing down, what's the Fed going to do? All of that is going to, sort of pick up speed, be in the news. And we want to be prepared for that, to have the information we need to answer with our relevant market opinion based upon fact, and really start to understand the inflation and recession question and what we should be talking about right now in the business. So, Tom, see you there from Florence, South Carolina. Great to have you on. Dorothy and Gilbert. Wendy, see you there in Houston. Edgar in Long Beach. So good to see everybody this morning. Amy, see you there in Riverside. So many people from across the country joining the deep dive right now. So good to see you. It's great to see everybody on there. So many people join, each week to start their week this way. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. I got some slides. As always, if you're a KCM member, you can go in and download these slides and use them for, a number of different things, to maybe having a listing presentation, maybe have on your phone or on a tablet that you're using, maybe even make a video. A lot of things you can do with the slides and getting those out there. So I'm going to share my screen. You see it right here. What I did is I took the notes from the last Federal Reserve's meeting, and I copied them into this slide. And they said a mild recession starting later this year with a recovery over the subsequent 2 years. Now, I'm not here this morning to say when or what a recession would look like. I'm more saying this is what is gaining steam. Talk of the economy slowing down, talk of recession. Recession is a term that signifies an economic slowdown. But back in 2008, I would argue that recession, that word took on a new meaning, where people maybe saw a loved one get hurt, maybe they themselves lost their home, or saw parents or relatives lose a home or go through something that was painful. And so it took on a new meaning back in the housing crisis. And a lot of times when people hear recession, they maybe think back to that and think back of those times. And so we want to keep that aware and present as we have conversations. But the question really, I believe we should be asking is, how would housing be impacted by a recession? So how would housing be impacted by a recession? That is the question that I believe we need to be able to answer. We need to have our relevant market opinion based upon fact to say, okay, if recession does come, and certainly Federal Reserve and people are talking about that, how would that affect our business? We can't control everything out in the world. We can't control what's happening, but we can control the area that we own. We can be the expert in the area that we own, certainly in the housing market. So let me start off with a perspective from Bankrate on recessions and how they typically affect our business. It says this: during a traditional recession, the Fed will usually lower interest rates. Now they're talking about the Fed funds rate. This creates an incentive for people to spend money and stimulate the economy. It also typically leads to more affordable mortgage rates, which leads to more opportunity for home buyers. So as we think about recession, we think about the economy slowing down. Typically, right there, what I've got underlined, leads to more affordable mortgage rates and more opportunity for home buyers. Typically is more advantageous for home buying. That's not something that we maybe think about traditionally relative to the housing market. Maybe we know that, maybe people we work with don't know that. There's one term that I think I would keep top of mind, or I would remind you of, and it's the curse of knowledge. Don't assume that just because you know this or you've experienced this and you've been in the business and you're like, well, David, I know that. Don't assume those that you're working with that they know that as well. Really, what we need to be prepared to have a discussion around is, what are the pros and cons of buying during a recession? This graphic right here, I think, kind of outlines a way to have a conversation around, hey, what are some of the pros of relative to competition and prices and mortgage rates, and the cons relative to maybe a stricter lending environment, maybe not as many options, and economic uncertainty now enters the picture. As we talk about recession, we talk about the economy slowing down. That means for people that maybe didn't worry about, am I going to have my job? Maybe now they do. There's more economic uncertainty that's entered the picture, and that certainly plays into decisions that people will make. But if you've been following KCM, you're a KCM member, you've got access to the graphics. You can run the plays that work, so to speak, relative to recession. And you'll be familiar with this graphic here. A recession doesn't mean falling prices. Typically, maybe in our business, we would think, oh gosh, if we go into recession, that's going to mean home prices fall. Well, we went back and did a survey of the last 6 recessions in this country. And what you see here is 4 times during those last 6 recessions, home prices actually appreciated. Most recently in 2020, when we were in a short recession there caused by the health scare, the pandemic related to COVID, home prices grew, but twice, going all the way back to the 80s, homes lost value. Only 2 times out of the 6. Once marginally in the early 90s when homes lost almost 2% value. But what people remember is the almost 20% in home value that was lost back during the housing crisis. I mentioned before that the word recession took on a new meaning back then, and that's why. Not typical of prior recessions, certainly not typical of what happened in 2020. So is we're getting this message out there, being armed, having this graphic on my phone, on a tablet, in my listing presentation, I think will help educate those that we're working with. I always think about this when KCM was formed. There's a quote from Dave Ramsey that said, whenever you're looking for help with finances, with investments, with real estate, look for someone with the heart of a teacher, not the heart of a salesperson. Our job right now is to be the teacher in this case and say, a recession doesn't mean falling home prices. If you go back and look at the last 6 recessions, you can see what happened. And as always, if you want to dig deeper into this, you can go into the notes on these slides and see the source reporting and take a look at that. But what a recession has meant over those 6 last recessions is falling mortgage rates. So you go all the way back again to the early 80s there, and each time we've been in a recession, we've seen mortgage rates come down. Why is that? Because as mortgage rates come down, that stimulates more housing, starts to pull the economy forward. So I think being educated here is what we have to do. It's where we have to be the expert and really delivering our message versus what's going to be heard maybe on the news or when you open a news app or read the newspaper about what is ahead in the economy. As the Fed meets, as we get a look at inflation going into next week, certainly that's going to uptick. And the bottom line here, the bottom line of this is that recession does not equal a housing crisis. I think getting that message out, being vocal about it, not assuming that if we know that those who are working with know that. The one thing we probably should be talking about more often is the strength of this housing market. I found a picture this past week that I was looking at, and there's a picture right here that I'll share with you. This tree is called the angel oak tree. It's a live oak tree just outside of Charleston, South Carolina. And scientists would say that this tree is probably somewhere between 300 and 400 years old. It's the largest live oak tree east of the Mississippi. It covers about 25 feet, the size of the tree, about 25 feet in each direction. But here's something interesting. what they would say is the root system of this tree is about double the size of the tree. So if the size of the tree is 25 feet, that means roots go out about 50 feet. And if you look at this tree right here, you could probably say, over 300 or 400 years, it's weathered some storms, some hurricanes, some heat, some rain, all the things that bear down upon a tree like this, but it stood the test of time because of the firm foundation, because of the root structure that's there. And I think if we use this analogy and we think about that analogy in the housing market, we live, and I believe, one of the, if not the strongest housing market of our lifetime because of the foundation, because of what's below the surface. And why do I make that claim? It's because of a couple of things. I want to give you just a couple of things really to set your mind there in that direction right now. One is the current rate of existing mortgages as of the fourth quarter. You see right here, in red, there are over 80% of mortgages in this country are at or below 5%. Over 50% are at or below 4%. Folks that are going to work extremely hard to stay in that house and that aren't going to default on that are people that have an advantageous mortgage rate. You can even say that's some of the reason, and we've talked about this, of some of the lack of inventory, people saying we're going to stay put. But no doubt they've got an advantage relative to the strength of this housing market. The second piece of this, Americans are sitting on a tremendous amount of equity right now. 68.1% have either paid off their mortgage or have at least 50% equity in their home, what they would term equity rich. And you see it here in this graphic. 38.7% of the people in this country own their home free and clear. In the blue, they're equity rich. 29.4% of mortgages there. Significant amount of equity that creates this firm foundation for housing as we go forward. So as articles come out and as maybe talk about recession or economic slowdown or whatever may be talked about, we need to realize we live in a housing market. We work in a housing market that has an extremely strong foundation right now. My hope is that you'll take these slides, you'll use them to really be the teacher, to be the one that is the expert that says, look, let me show you, let me sit down with you, let me educate you on what's really happening in this housing market. In just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Jess to see if we have any questions here for the deep dive. But before that, this Wednesday, we've got a webinar coming up that I want to invite you to. It's how to grow your business in a busy housing market. We're in the busy spring market, really out there doing the business. And this will be a chance to come and spend an hour working on your business, talking about what are the disciplines you need to have right now. What are the things that you need to be educated on so that you can be the expert? So if you go to trykcm.com/webinar, you can register for that and join us on Wednesday. Love to have you there. So Jess, I'm going to pause for a second. Do we have any questions of people in the chat?
Hi, Dave. I did see just one question come through today. It's from Scott. Mm-hmm. Scott said, Dave, great info for today. How do you factor in the low inventory / low supply that underlies this marketplace?
How do you factor that in?
Yes, that was his question.
I'm not sure that I'm following with that question. I think low supply is going to keep upward pressure on prices. If that's the question you're asking, I think it makes the housing market even stronger. We need more inventory. There's not a market across the country that doesn't say, we would benefit from more inventory. So let's see, Scott, I see your question here. How do you factor in the low inventory that underlies this marketplace? I think it makes stronger. That's your point there, Scott, in saying yes, but we need more. It's not going to lead to certainly prices falling. You'd have to make a case for that. And no doubt we need more inventory all over the country. Somebody asked a question there about the debt ceiling and what that will have on housing. I'm not going to take a stab at that question. I'm going to stay in what we own here. Don't know that. I think it's outside of our control, truthfully, but certainly we'll watch that. All right. If we don't have any other questions, we'll wrap up on that. We'll be back next Monday. I believe George is going to be on the deep dive next Monday talking about home prices. You're not going to want to miss that. Make sure you're on next Monday, and we will see you back then. Take care.